episode in store for you today. I know you always hear me talking about community, and how just really one of the big reasons I started this podcast and why it's in existence is because God laid it on my heart to really build community with like-minded, like-hearted women who really are just kind of in the same spot in life and just can relate with one another, and women that we can just like share our experiences with, good and bad, and just know that, hey, this person knows what I'm going through because they've been through it or something similar themselves. And really, who better to offer encouragement and just support than someone who's been through what you're going through. So obviously community is really a big part of this show. So why not do an entire episode on it? And I couldn't think of anyone better to have on the show for talking about this subject than one of my absolute best friends, Kacie Freeman. Y'all are going to love her. I'm already letting you know ahead of time. She is so awesome. And really, I've just been able to watch her because we both have moved to this area from different states. And I've lived here quite a bit longer, but I've gotten to see her process. I know what my process looked like, and I've gotten to watch her and her process. And I'm like, man, she has done this so much more gracefully than I ever could have hoped to. And I'm like, just taking mental notes of like, all right, this is really how you build community. This is how you do it. Kacie has got it down. She wouldn't say that she does, but I'm saying that she does. And just to give you a little background on Kacie, she has her bachelor's in international business from the University of Memphis, and she is a strategic planning project manager for an international relief and development organization. So she's got a huge heart for people and for missions and for God especially. And she really has a big heart just for community and building community. So today we're going to not only talk about just like why community is important, but also what are some practical steps that we can take to build community starting today? Like, we're going to have steps for you to actually walk away from this episode and not be overwhelmed, but just think, okay, I can take one small step today to really help build and grow and expand my community and the friends that I have around me. So I am really excited for you to hear just what came out of today and really just the wisdom and even the spiritual revelation that Kacie brings today as we talk about community. So let's jump in. Hey ladies, welcome back to The Beauty of Becoming. I'm your host, Whitney McDermott, and this is the podcast for single women pursuing Jesus, their purpose, and healthy relationships. And I am so pumped for today's episode because I get to introduce you to one of my besties, one of my best friends. She's just so amazing. Like, you're just going to fall in love with her. And she has such wisdom. And it's so funny because when we were talking about like what we want to talk about today and stuff, she made this outline, and it's just like scripture after scripture and like a beautiful outline. If you're an Enneagram 1, like, it is the outline of outlines. And I'm like, girl, if you don't quit messing around, like, you're going to be a preacher. You're going to be speaking at women's conferences. Like, I already see it. So I want to introduce you to one of my absolute best friends in the world, Miss Kacie Freeman.
Aw. Hey, friends.
Hey.
Thanks for letting me join the podcast. This is so exciting for me.
I know. And this is like the first of many podcasts, I believe, that you're going to be on. So just real quick before we like dive into everything, I know you because of course we're besties, but the ladies listening don't know you. And so why don't you just like briefly just tell us a little bit about yourself and a fun fact if you have one.
Yeah. Okay. So like Whitney said, my name is Kacie. I have lived in this area for the past 3 years, moved here for a job. So I work at an international relief and development org, and just get to do some really fun stuff all around the world.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's what I do here. A fun fact. So my birthday is February 20th, and I love celebrating my birthday. Mm-hmm. So for the past couple of years, I was like, man, what would be something that I could like celebrate every month? So now on the 20th of every month, I try to do something fun.
What?
To just celebrate me.
How am I just now learning this about you? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I'll like, I don't know, go to a new restaurant or get coffee or just like go on a walk. I love being outside. So anything just fun to just kind of celebrate.
That is such a good, I need to implement that, but except I'm the person that like celebrates my birthday all month long.
Oh, I do that too.
Oh, you do that too? Okay. So I'm not alone in this then. Like, it's totally normal.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're in good
company. I see you. But see, my birthday's on the 31st, so I don't always, I'll have to like move it to the 30th. for like months that don't have 31 days?
I think there's some leeway.
Okay.
I think that's allowed.
Okay, perfect. Well, cool. Hey, you learn something new every day. You never quit learning about your friends. Yeah. So I love that. I always think of topics that like, what would be good for the podcast? And it's always like, okay, well, what have I experienced? Or like, what am I walking through? What are some questions I have? Or what's like God teaching me? And so obviously like this topic of community came up because God's really been talking to me about just growing my community and like what that can look like and the importance of it and things like that. And I know that's something that like you and I both have discussed and talked about. So as I was thinking of it, I'm like, man, who would be a good person to do that episode with? And I'm like, Kacie, of course. She's like the queen of community. That's what I'm going to dub you as.
That's hilarious.
Yes, I'm dubbing her as the queen of community because literally, so we're both from out of state. She's from Mississippi. Mm-hmm. I'm from Illinois. And so we both have moved to the area and have had to like really rebuild our communities, you know, because when you like grow up in a place, born and raised, you already have that like built in who you've like gone to school with and who your parents know and like your family and stuff like that. And so when you move to a new area, it's like it's starting over and it's like ground level. How do I start making friends? And I feel like we're in a time where it's kind of hard to break in and make friends. Like even in the church, I know like I struggled for a long time with just finding where I fit and just a group of people that are just kind of like-minded and that we could do life together with. So I'm really excited. I think this is a needed topic because it's not only a singleness topic. It's like a skill that we're going to need for the rest of our lives, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and definitely carrying over into marriage too. Mm-hmm. Like the friendships that you build right now are going to sustain you and carry you through your marriage.
Yes.
Like you don't just stop being friends with people once you're married. Your husband doesn't fill that whole void.
Yeah. Or it shouldn't be that way, at least.
Yeah, for sure. It shouldn't be that way. So.
Yeah, I love that because that's something that like my eyes have been open to. I was listening to a podcast about marriage and they were talking about like what kind of community are you building now that you can invite your husband into? Right. And I thought that was super interesting because I'm like, I mean, I have good friends, but I don't think I do like enough activities and I don't think I'm like faithful enough to be like, when I do get married, like that would be something that's like constant and carried over. And so that's something that I've been working on too, is just being more faithful because I am one that I don't mind being alone. You know, like I can go to a movie alone or a restaurant alone. So I have to make sure that I'm like being intentional because it's not good to be alone all the time. Like obviously we can take our alone time for sure, but it's definitely important to start integrating community because it is something you'll need throughout. I mean, we don't stop needing girlfriends once we get married.
Right. Exactly.
We need them maybe even more than ever. Right. So I'm really excited to talk about community and we're going to go through like the whole spectrum of like, what is it? Why do we need it? How do you cultivate it? Even to the point of like, what are some practical steps to that today? Like ladies listening, you could take these steps and start working on them immediately today to start building that community because I know it can be overwhelming for sure. So I just want to even start with, like I said, you moved to the area. What was your experience like, you know, not knowing, I don't even think you have family here, right? Yeah. So, I mean, you literally just like moved here for a job. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I did. I graduated college and was starting the job search and trying to figure out what my next steps were and really believe the Lord opened up an opportunity here. So in the current city, it's 5 hours away from my family, away from anyone that I've known. So I moved here without having any friends or any family and really just trusting the Lord that he was going to provide. And he provided a job, he provided a place to live. And I would say next to those two things, my biggest prayer was like, Lord, help me find solid friends and just solid community, faithful friends. And I love that we're doing this together because I look back at that time and know that you were probably my first friend in the time.
I love that so much.
And so I know that the Lord was just so faithful to provide your friendship and that really you were my first friend in the area. So when I started working, we worked at the same place. Just right about the same time that I'd started. And since then, it just seemed like you became family. Your family became family and just really welcomed me in. And what I love about our friendship, though, is that we have fun and we're able to cut up and just like make fun of each other and keep it so fun.
It took us so long to start this episode because we kept laughing.
But that's part of it. But the other side is you are one of the people that just knows me deeply. And you know me, you know the things that I struggle with, the things that are hard for me. And there's so many times when I've reached out and just said, hey, Whit, I need you to pray about this. And you need both. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, yeah, I just always look at that season, and we've been friends for like about 3 years, going on 3 years now. And it's just, I mean, I feel like we've known each other forever, but it's just because we've been able to cultivate just that depth and really walk with each other through seasons and be vulnerable about what we're going through and invite each other in. So,
yeah, I know. I put it in like every birthday card or like Christmas card or something, but I'm like, Kacie, you have taught me what it looks like to be a really good friend. And not that, I mean, I don't know, there's just, I feel like there's different ways to like be friends and like show like how you love and care for a person and stuff, but it's just like, you do it so well. Like you love people so well that I'm like, oh, I want to be that friend to someone.
You're that friend to me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, let's just go ahead and dive in just to what is community, and specifically like biblical community, because I know like the world portrays like a certain type of like, this is what community looks like, but what as Christians like can community look like for us?
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, just in the day and age that we live in, everyone's on social media. Everyone sees people, at least to an extent, but you're not fully seen and fully known.
Yeah, that's so true.
You don't know people deeply. You see a lot, but walking day in and day out, doing life together, that's just not the reality of like what friendship is portrayed as in our day and age. So I would think biblical community is being in close relationship with people who are pushing you like closer and closer to Christ, that you bring out the best in each other, that it's vulnerable, that you share what you're struggling with, but you also share what God's doing in your life, and you get to celebrate with each other when prayers are answered and you see God moving. And also people to just do life with. I mean, I think sometimes we think community has to be so deep and so intimate all the time, but it's also just walking with someone consistently, like
that's good,
going to get groceries together, hanging out, just spending time together. And of course, like biblical community is making Christ the center of that, and really focusing on, you know, how are we pushing each other towards Christ? How are we becoming more like Christ through our friendship? But yeah, I think it's both and.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the whole, like, we're just doing life together. And so I just thought of like when we took that Costco trip together. I'd never been to Costco, and she's like, let's go. And so we just spent like, it was like a Friday night or something, just like walking around Costco and just in awe of everything that is Costco.
Such a wild Friday night.
I know, right?
But that's such the best. Yeah. And we ended up just hanging out for a couple hours. And I think that night too, I was like, Whitney, I'm really struggling with like this specific thing. And we were just talking in my car. And I just remember leaving feeling so encouraged and just so seen. And I'm like, man, I'm just thankful that Whitney's a safe place that I can like share things with, and knowing that you're going to point me back to Christ. So it's like even nights like that, like love Costco, but love our car conversations.
You love me more than Costco? That says a lot.
It really does.
Yeah, I know. That's like, and I feel the same way about you. And that's like when we foster, like when we are a safe place, then we like give other people permission to like become a safe place, or, you know, like they feel safe to share, and then they value that so much that they want to be a safe place that you can share. And it's just that like reciprocation. And that's what I love about just like that biblical real community. Like you said, like we're pulling each other more towards Christ, like not away. And we're just able to share like our struggles. And I know even like you reaching out to be like, can you pray for me this week about X, Y, and Z? Like I had never been able like free to do that with other people. And I think part of that's just like my personality of like, oh, I can bear it on my own. Like I don't want to put that on other people kind of thing. But it really got me thinking, like, why not? Why not just reach out and let, you know, my friends know that, like, I'm going through this and I need prayer. And that's been a really neat thing, like, I've incorporated in my life now. Yeah. And it just means a lot. I know one time I was having a rough night and I was just, like, reached out to you and just frustrated that I was, like, still dealing with some issues that, like, just even, like, at work where it was, like, I couldn't like get this thing down, you know? And I'm like, why can't I like just get this down? I don't understand. And you just like sent this encouraging, like not only did you pray, but you were just like sent this encouraging message, and it just made my night like so much, you know, like refocused me. And so that's what I love about biblical community. Like you said, is it's so much more than just, it is like having fun and cutting up and doing these things together, but also like it's to like a spirit level too, you know, when God brings people together. So I absolutely love that. And I know we've kind of like already dove into this a little bit, but like why do we need community? Because like, especially in a day and age where it's like we have social media and smartphones and, you know, even just like Zoom and stuff like that, or this podcast, it's easy to like kind of fill that void in some ways, but at the same time, like we talked earlier, it really doesn't, it's not the complete package.
Right. Yeah.
It's not the like full, like I'm thankful for those things, but that doesn't replace like the one-on-one, like together time, hanging out. So why do you think that like we need community and it's so important?
Yeah, I think from a biblical perspective that community was God's design from the beginning. I mean, you look in Genesis where God was getting ready to create man, and he said, let us create man in our own image. In our own image, God is talking about him, the Father, the Holy Spirit, that he's in community already. And that was God's perfect design, is that we're going to create man in community.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's such a good point.
Yeah. And so you think like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense that we have this innate desire to be known, to be seen.
It's like in our DNA.
Yeah. And you read in the next chapter that God created Adam, and he said, it's not good for man to be alone. Like he needs a helper. So it was someone that he was going to make, and is, you know, to be in community with him, that he's supposed to live and work and do life with someone else. So yeah, I think just from the beginning, like that's God's best.
Yeah. And I love that, because I know my whole life it's just been, I've noticed this need of like, I just need to love and be loved. And I, you know, like you think of the needs of like food and water and shelter and stuff like that. But it's like, even if you have all of those things, it's like, I still need like a family or someone that like is doing life with me that I can like express love to and receive love. And it's like, you drew out such a good point, is like, that's because it's God literally designed us like that.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we can feel guilty, especially as singles, of like desiring love. And even like, it doesn't even have to be just romantic, but just friendships and, you know, just that feeling of loneliness when we don't have that. Like I know in my life, I've kind of put guilt and shame on myself for feeling those things, but finally realized that like, wait, I don't have to beat myself up for this, because God made me like this.
Right. And God created us to need, first off, like a relationship with him and to find our identity in him, but he created us to need each other. Like we all have different gifts so that we can build each other up and encourage each other. Like, I would argue that neediness isn't, you know, a bad thing. Like that's how we love one another and show one another and serve one another. So I think that just being in a relationship with people is literally just feeling a need.
Yeah.
And that's not anything to be, you know, feel shame about or feel like a burden, because that's part of the human existence too, is to need and to be in need.
Yeah, that's so good. And even as we look in scripture and like look at the life of Jesus, I love how his life and like how he did ministry and stuff modeled community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Something that always has stuck out to me is that Jesus was very effective in his outward ministry. And so he ministered to so many people, but as he did that and had a public ministry, he also withdrew in solitude a lot. And he withdrew to be with the people closest to him. So he had his 12 disciples that did life together, that they lived with Jesus, ate, traveled, prayed, learned from Jesus. But then out of those 12, he still had his close 3 that it was like, these people walk with me through thick and thin. Like they see every part, this intimate relationship. And so I think sometimes too, we feel like, oh, we have to have this huge circle of friends and community has to look a certain way. And, you know, we need X, Y, Z number of people, but really that's not what Jesus did. I mean, he had a group of friends, but then he had the intimate ones that were close, that they walked closely. So I think when I think of community, I think of, man, there's several people in my life that I know that they're going to be with me through thick and thin, that they're spurring me on, and we're encouraging one another in Christ. So it's
the ride or dies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's like definitely something I want to bring up, is just there are different types of friendships.
Right.
And we don't have to have, like you said, like even having like 1 million followers on like Instagram or something, like that doesn't mean anything. Like that doesn't mean you have close friendships. You know, it's not about like the quantity, it's about the quality. And one thing that I love about Jesus pouring into the 12 disciples is they literally, 12 was all the number he needed to literally evangelize the world.
Right.
Yeah. Pouring into 12 people. Because sometimes I think like, oh, I need to, get out there more, make more friends, or like, I don't have enough, like trying to just like keep up with other people. And it's like, wait a second, like I just need to stay in my lane, like cultivate the relationships with the people that God has given me, and that like, or like we've crossed paths and stuff like that. And just really work on developing those, because like 12 was enough to literally disciple the world. And so like, what kind of like impact could it make, like 12 friends in my life, and even like having those closer 3, that is important to know, like who is like a good friend, but who's like the ride or die that I could share anything with. Because the thing is, we have to be careful that we're not like oversharing with the wrong people.
Right.
We don't have to share everything with everyone. It's important to know like who is on that deep, intimate level with me, that like we've been through some stuff together. We've provided like a safe environment for each other. I know like she has my back, I have hers. And that's like what we have, just like, I know I could trust you with anything. But I have other friends that like I have a great time with, like we hang out, we've had good conversations, but I wouldn't necessarily like tell the things to like him or her that I get to talk to you. And so I love that you drew out that point. And even just in relationships in general, sometimes we have relationships with people that are like you and I, that we're like running the race together, kind of at the same place. But we also sometimes will have friends that maybe are a little like not yet to the place that we're at. And so maybe we get to kind of help like mentor them and lead them to that next place in life. But then we also have people that we're like drawing from that are leading us. So just it's important to know like not all friendships are going to be like equal, if that makes sense. And like in the trust that you place in them, and maybe like the things that you share with them. But really just like one of the best things we can do is identify like who is who.
Yeah. And it looks different in different seasons too.
So true.
You may have, I know in like last year was a season for me where I just really needed a lot of prayer and needed a lot of encouragement. And next season might be like that for you. So I think understanding, how you can love your friends well too. And I think that's why it's so important, to know that you have those people, those solid people that are going to be with you through thick and thin. So you're not just, feeling like abandoned after a hard season, but
exactly.
That you're struggling well with each other too.
Yeah. And one of the things we talked about was like that God reveals himself through others. And I love that point, because one time I was at a service and it was like this mom and daughter were getting prayed for. And the daughter had been called to the mission field and was like going to be leaving soon. And the mom was just like in tears, like she was supportive of it, but obviously like her baby girl was about to like go fly across the world. And that just like hit my heart. And I literally was like, God, why do we have children if they're just going to leave us? I like took it to level 11. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to have kids because they're just going to leave me. And, but I literally was just like, joking aside, I was like, God, why do we have kids? Like, cause it can be like a painful experience to like watch them leave. And the Holy Spirit just like spoke to me and was like, because each person is a unique expression of myself in the earth.
That's good. And
it was like, oh, okay. Like as we, just like we ourselves are unique expressions of God. Like we show a facet of God that like he put something in me and like put something in you, and it's different, but it's like both showing a unique aspect of God in the earth. And I'm like, okay, so that makes it worth it. When your kids leave, or, maybe when they're not like living the way that you would want them to, that's still like a gift to you and to the earth, that like this is a unique expression of God, like lived out.
That's so good.
Yeah. And so like, what do you think about like in that vein of like God showing himself through others, like in community or friendship?
Yeah. Like to your point, I think God gives us both and gives everyone unique gifts to use to edify the body and to build each other up. So and I know that I'm my best when I have people around me encouraging me and bringing out Christ in me. So I think that goes back to what you were saying about just having different gifts and then the Lord really using you and surrounding you with other people to bring out those gifts.
That's so good.
And I think that's why it's important too to have friends who are different from you and like recognize their differences and speak out strengths about their differences.
That's so good.
Yeah, I think something that you do really well is you are just like such a faith-filled friend.
Oh.
And I think I tend to doubt more. And so when I'm around you, I'm like, man, God is big. Like Whitney serves a big God.
Oh.
And it just reminds me and encourages me like, yeah, that's the same God that I serve. Like, why couldn't he do that in my life?
That's so good.
So I just think of examples like that. And then I have other friends who challenge me and are just bold in their faith and are bold in truth to me. So I know that they love me, but I know that they're going to tell me the hard truth that I need to hear.
Yeah, I have those too.
But I'm so grateful for all of those different friends and like the different gifts that they bring to the table because like you said, you know, we get to see different expression of God through those friends. And so that's why it's important to surround yourself not with just yes people or people that just look like you or think the same as you, but that really operate in the gifts that God gives them in a way that you get to see and know and come to love Christ more deeply.
Yeah, and having those different perspectives also is like great. There's like different perspectives and points of view and stuff, even for like when you're making decisions or when you just need like, how do you see this? Like when you look at it and, you know, there's like scripture that talks about like wisdom and safety is like in the abundance of counselors. Like I love that. Just having different people from like even different walks of life. Like, listen, my like spiritual mama, Debbie, she's in her 60s and I like consider her a best friend.
Yeah.
And she does me too. And I'm 28. So it's like, we don't even have to be in the same generation.
Yeah.
Don't have to like vote for the same political party or whatever. Like as long as we're just for each other and love Jesus, like I love what you're saying is that like so many different perspectives can be brought in. And, you know, there is like wisdom in having different people around to see different perspectives. So that's good. And of course, you know, just kind of to wrap up, why we need community is just like, even just the prayer support and things that we can offer each other.
Yeah.
So love that. So let's just talk about real quick. What are some threats to community?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, remembering that we're in a spiritual battle and that there is an enemy that wants to divide, destroy, and kill anything that the Lord is creating. And so if God desires unity with his kids and he desires deep relationships, then there's a spiritual battle going on and the enemy is going to seek to destroy and divide that. So I think knowing that helps keep us alert and keep us proactive in our relationships and to protect unity and to see that as like part of our mission too. And being aware that like the enemy is really trying to like sow discord and disunity between the closest of friends. So if I know that going in, I'm like how I approach conflict with my friends, how I approach just serving them and loving them and even like my view of them, believing the best about them, like it looks different.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's something that God like taught me through actually like just kind of having a situation with a family member and something was said that I was like, ooh, that kind of hurt or offended me. And I was going to start kind of like ruminating on it and dwelling on it. But then Holy Spirit was like, you know, you're both on the same team, right?
That's good.
And I was like, dang, that is so true. Like, so then I was like, okay, I'm not going to get offended. I'm not going to think the worst about this person because I know they love me. I know they're for me. It was probably just something they didn't even think like sounded the way that it sounded. And so I'm just going to like approach this from that perspective instead of like automatically thinking the worst.
Right.
And I think we need to get to that place of just like when we know somebody and we've been in community, you owe them to like think the best of them.
Right.
You know, and might like if they've invested and they love you and they, you know, they care about you, like you owe it to them to at least just like give them the benefit of the doubt and like address it.
Yeah.
You know, don't just like leave it in offense. I think that's so, such an important thing to think. And as you're talking about unity, I was thinking of, I just had a talk with a friend that we were talking about unity, and I was kind of coming at it from the point of like, oh, if you're in unity, like you agree on everything. And she was like, I don't think we have the same definition of unity. And she was just like, Winnie, you can be in unity with someone that you don't agree with everything.
Yeah.
You know, you may have differences of points of view and stuff, or maybe would like approach a situation different. But as long as you're like for each other and you're like heading in the same direction, like that's unity.
That's good.
And that marked me because literally like until a month ago or 2 months ago, my definition of unity was like, we're thinking the same thoughts and we're like, we choose the same things and we resolve it the same way. And it's like, no, that's like conformity. That's not unity.
That's so good.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
and so harder in practice. Like, I think that sounds so great, but when we're faced with a situation where we actually have to put that in practice, I think the Lord really reveals a lot of like selfishness and pride in our own hearts.
So true. Because it's like, wait, so I may actually have to like do this their way and not necessarily like that's not the way I would do it, but like because I'm for them, like
yeah.
And obviously, you know, like if it's something that's like morally wrong or whatever, like that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about like differences of like how you do things, or even just like even some beliefs, like as long as it's not the core beliefs that are like foundational to the faith or whatever, you know, those things can vary, but that doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Right.
That doesn't make them like the enemy or like us versus them.
Right.
And that's like an us versus them mentality is like for sure detrimental to relationship and cancel culture. Like I'm just going to throw that in there. I'm so against cancel culture because we need to be like calling them in, not calling them out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So what about like, what has rejection played in? Do you feel like to threat, like being a threat to community?
Yeah. I think that's probably our biggest, aside from knowing that there is a spiritual battle at play. I think rejection is the biggest threat to community because
I would agree with that.
I think people are just so scared and so fearful of being known. That I'm going to show you all my scars and all my pain, and you're just going to walk away and say, Case, that's too much. I can't handle that. But it's also so interesting to me because like the antithesis of that would be vulnerability. And it's like, man, if we're not vulnerable, if we're not willing to share, like you had mentioned earlier, like we set the pace for how deep we want our friendship to go. If I'm vulnerable with you and share and kind of create a safe space for us to both share, that's how we drive friendships deeper and really are able to build meaningful connection and encourage each other better. Like if I know how you're struggling, like I know how to best encourage you and best pray for you and support you.
Yeah, that's so good. And it like creates this like, oh my gosh, you feel that way too?
Yeah.
Like literally nothing, because I've been learning about vulnerability specifically the last like year and a half, 2 years, and just like learning how to practice it and be like bold enough and courageous enough to do it. And literally like nothing has grown my relationships like deeper, quicker than like being vulnerable. And of course, like we said earlier, like you have to know who you can be vulnerable with about what, and you just kind of like feel that out. You know, you can just kind of give like a little bit. And then as you know, like, okay, this is like a safe place. Then all of a sudden I can kind of dump more, you know, like unload a little bit more baggage. And but literally since I've been being more vulnerable and even just like doing this podcast and stuff, like this is a huge vulnerability step, but I have never heard more of like, oh my gosh, I am so relieved that I'm not the only one going through that, or like that I'm not the only one that thought that, or, you know, you have doubts too, or you like whatever it is, like people just are like, thank God somebody said something.
And that's so true, because I think it goes back to how the enemy just loves to isolate and bring people into isolation. And like you said, the best part is when you share something and you're like, you have a friend say, oh yeah, I've actually gone through the same thing, or I've been there too. So I think vulnerability has a way of just connecting people around a topic and around an experience that the Lord can use, whereas the devil just seeks to isolate and seeks to keep us siloed off from people and really not sheltered, not isn't the right word, but probably really siloed from people. Vulnerability has a way of breaking down those walls.
Yeah. And sometimes I find it's a pride thing.
Yeah.
Of like, kind of like I said earlier, like what I didn't reach out for prayer or stuff. Like, I kind of think maybe some of it was just pride of like, I got this. I can take care of this on my own. Like I can do it. And because I am such naturally like a go-getter and an achiever and accomplisher, and you are too. So I know it's been like hard for me. I think one of the threats I've dealt with is just like, don't be prideful.
Yeah.
Just like, admit, that you're going through something or you're struggling, like, and that's okay because everybody is.
And I mean, it says in the word that we're supposed to bear one another's burdens.
So good. You brought so much like good scripture out today. I love it.
So it's like, man, that's actually what we're called to do. We're called to walk with each other. We're called to invite people into our lives and what's going on. And you're right. A lot of that is just humbling ourselves before other people and asking God to forgive us when, our pride gets in the way of building relationships and be honest about what's really going on. And like I said earlier, I don't want to give the impression that every time you have to be honest about what's going on, like it's a struggle. Because it's also really encouraging when even for this podcast, for example, this was something that you and I had been praying about last year.
Yeah, that's so true.
And it was just a dream and a vision that God had given you. And so it was so encouraging for me because I have journals of when I would pray for this specifically for you over last year. Yeah. And it just encourages my faith too, to think like, man, God provided in this way for Whitney and I was part of seeing him do it.
Yeah. That's good because that's what I know. I heard someone say like, if you don't have, because some people maybe like you're new to the faith or you're like, I haven't experienced God in that way, or something's just like so big that you're like, it's hard to have the faith for it. Borrow other people's stories.
Yeah.
So like you've said, like you've seen God work in my life in big ways. And like, so you're borrowing those, like, God, if you've done this for Whitney, like you can do it for me. And I love being able to, or even just in the Bible, like if there's a story that sticks out to you, you're like, God, you did that for Ruth, or you did that for David or Esther. Like then I can build up the faith that you can do that for me as well.
Yeah.
So I love that. And I think, like, what's another threat to community that you can think of?
I would think another threat would be just unforgiveness and harboring resentment and bitterness. Like we said in the beginning of the podcast, relationships are hard.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard. I think I've heard it said that people make up the best and the worst parts of life.
Yeah.
And that is so true.
I can see that.
And I think relationships, we have to fight for them, and we have to fight for our unity, and we have to understand that like we're all sinful people. Like no one is perfect.
Yeah.
I think in a way where we can sometimes as singles idolize marriage and idolize like a husband and a spouse, thinking that they're going to fill every relational void that we have. I think we can sometimes do that in friendship too and think, man, well, when I just find my core group of people, it'll be great. Like everything will work out then. And honestly, that's just not the case. I think when you go into it knowing that we're all sinful, we're all broken, and we need each other to get through this life, to push each other towards a perfect God who will never disappoint us and never leave us, that it gives you just the freedom to be wrong. It gives you the freedom to, to ask for forgiveness and just really humble yourself in relationships. So I think just working towards reconciliation too with friends and believing the best. And we kind of talked about it earlier, but just, resolving conflict well and fighting for relationships and understanding that, we do have an enemy who is seeking to divide and coming back to that. And, what else would you add? Yeah.
Well, I know specifically, like, I was listening to a pastor and he was talking about walking with the same like mentor, kind of like spiritual dad for like 25 years or something. And he was like, and don't think for a second, there weren't times where like I wanted to leave this like friendship or like he wanted to leave it. There were like multiple times, but he's like the power that because we stuck it through, like this is what has happened. Like this is the culture like of our church now. And this is like how my life has been so blessed in his life and just the legacy there. And I'm like, that is so true. Like, just whether it's like the mentors in your life, like I know mine, like they could have left me at multiple points, you know, like when I was just acting immature or things like that. And maybe they've done something to like offend me where I could have just walked away. But then when I think about what my life would be like without them in it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a scary thought because they've made such an impact. And even just friendships, you know, there's like, I could have like let offenses or things like just eat me up inside or like resentment or whatever. But like, then I would miss out on everything that person has like meant to me and like added to my life and vice versa. And it's just not worth it.
Right.
Like it's not resentment is not worth it. Like bitterness is not worth it. Unforgiveness is not worth it. And so I agree, like that can be a huge detriment to friendship. But if we can like point it out like in ourselves, like when it happens and just like address it right away, I think that's the way we need to live, you know?
And I think too, it goes back to like we were talking about earlier, is that your friendships, one of the best things about them is that they encourage you in your walk with Christ, and that you get to see Christ through other people.
Yeah.
And so one of the things like I try and do is to give my friends permission to call me out on things, because that's also like one of the best parts of friendships is saying, you know, I know that I have blind spots and there are things that, you know, I'm going to make excuses for my sin and I'm going to make excuses for myself, but I need my friends to be honest with me. I need them to just be real with me and in love, like call out sin in my life and push me closer to Christ. And so I think, I think that's like a benefit of friendship too. It's for our own protection, is that we have people, we're surrounding ourselves with people who want our good and want our best and want to see us grow in relationship with God. And so it's in love that they rebuke. And so
I know she sent me one of those texts, y'all, where she was like, I just want you to know if you see something in me that like needs to be corrected, and I like read that and my mouth like went because I'm like, I have never been bold enough to like just like text somebody that, because I'm like, that takes humility, like that takes and I like my level of respect went up another notch for you, like as if it could even more. But I'm like, dang, this girl's like walking it out, because she's saying like, call me out. If you see something, just call me out, which, you know, I'll do it in love.
Right.
But yeah, mad respect.
But we also have that relationship where I know that Whitney wants the best for me. Like, and she knows that like I want the best for her too. And I trust your relationship with the Lord. Like I trust, just that you would speak something like you said in love, and that it's only for my good, you know? So
and I'm like, you can do that to me too, Kacie. I guess like I'll step on. And I think just kind of one last thing that's like a threat to community is passivity. And definitely like when you move to a new city, you know, like you learn really fast that you have to initiate. You can't just like sit on your couch and watch Netflix and expect their friends to come. Right? Like you have to be willing to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to try new things. You have to be willing, honestly, to like risk it, you know, because you could invest time in someone or in a relationship and it like not work out. But just being willing to just like keep initiating, keep moving forward. I think that's been definitely like a big way of how I've been able to like build community. How about you?
I think the same. When you were talking about moving to a new city, that is so true, because it's like all comfort is stripped away. And it's like, all right, God, you're about to make me bold. And I think it just pushes you so far out of your comfort zone that you come to a point where you're like, okay, it has to be God that provides some of these relationships. It has to be God to provide some of the right people.
For sure.
And I think sometimes we can like get in this mentality of like, well, if I don't want to bother them, or if they wanted to hang out, they would, or they would talk to me if they wanted to hang out. I know they have a ton of things going on. But it's like, believe the best about people. Go invite them to coffee. The worst that they could say is no. And you're already not having coffee with them, so you have nothing to lose.
Right. There's, no way you're going down. Like you're literally, Yeah, and I was just like, as you were talking, it was funny because like as we were like first, it's probably like the first birthday that you had like after we'd become friends and stuff. Like I just invited you like, hey, I'm going to this youth group, or not youth group, but like young adults group. Like, do you want to come with? And you're like, yeah. And I remember it was like this like crazy experience that we had at this church. And I'm like, this girl is here on her birthday, like spending her birthday with me doing this. Like, she's amazing.
And on my end, I'm like, man, this is my first birthday in a new city and I have plans.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like such a perfect picture of like, here I'm like, man, she's probably thinking this is like the lowest birthday she's ever had. But here you were excited, like, yeah. Hey, we have plans. Like, I'm making a new friend. This is amazing.
That's so true.
I love that. So let's just go ahead as we wrap up this episode. We promised you ladies that we would give you practical steps to cultivating community. And so that's what we're going to do. Kacie, what would you say are some practical steps?
The first step that I would say is just pray. If you're thinking that after listening to us and listening to us talk about friendship, that you might be sitting in a lonely place or just wondering like, man, that sounds great, but I don't have this kind of people in my life or in my circle of influence. And I would just say the best thing that you can do is pray and ask God, like, who have you given in my area? Who do I have interactions with? I mean, it might be minimal. It might be just someone you see at a coffee shop that you could go deeper with. But I really,
or at work or church or something. Yeah.
But I really believe like God puts us in places for specific reasons and purposes, and he entrusts people to us. Like we have a responsibility to steward the people and the people that he's given us well. Yeah. So pray and ask God who he surrounded you with, and and ask who those people are and that you can go deeper with.
Yeah, I love that. And I think another thing too is like, as you're praying, another practical step is like, start like checking out churches or like, young adult groups, or if you're like divorced, like go to the like divorce groups or whatever, just like start just like reaching out into like places that are good ground.
Right.
I guess is like what I want to say. And I think I mentioned it before on an episode, but like one time I was going through something, I don't even remember, like I was like 16 and I just needed a word from the Lord. I'm like, God, I just need to hear from you, like on what to do or direction or whatever. And I went to church and usually at this church, like God would speak to me, like, and it would be like, oh, that was on time. Like, that's exactly what I needed. And this time it didn't happen like that, of course, but I'm like desperate. And I went home to my dad and it was just like, Dad, like, I'm just really struggling with this. I'm disappointed because I went to church and like it was like completely like not even in the realm of like what I needed, kind of thing. And my dad was like, well, I'm sorry that happened. I don't know why like God allowed that to happen, but I do know you're going to the right place. And so just like keep going back, like you're going to God. And so eventually you're going to get your answer. Eventually he's going to lead or direct you in whatever way he needs to. And so that's what I would even say about like finding community is just like go to those places like church, go to those places that are like life-giving, because like you may not get like that friend right away, but if you keep being faithful, like eventually God's going to provide,
Right.
So, and then I think another thing is like we talked about earlier is just like initiate and ask people to hang out.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. I mean, it can be going to get coffee, going on a walk, just
going to a youth group or a young adults group on your birthday.
So true.
Or going to Costco.
Always down to go to Costco. I'd recommend that for everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, just be someone who initiates, be someone who is seeking people out and not just seeking to be sought out.
Oh, that's good.
So
how many times have we been that person or we've heard that person be like, no one came up to me and shook my hand, or like no one spoke to me. And I literally want to be like, did you speak to anyone?
Right.
Like you hear that so much in the church and I'm just kind of like over it. It's like, why didn't you shake someone's hand? Like maybe someone was having a bad day and like really needed you to come up to them.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely being the initiator and being the friend that like you're looking for too. And that you're hoping to have, I think is another important one.
For sure. We had talked about just creating a space that's safe and being vulnerable. And I think a lot of what we're talking about is just being someone who is proactive in friendships and setting the tone and setting the pace for it. So if you're lonely on a Friday night and want to hang out, invite someone to hang out.
Yeah.
If you're someone that needs prayer like me all the time, ask someone for prayer.
Yeah.
So just be the friend that you're hoping to find. And I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say too, like, you are one of the most like proactive people I know. So when I like want to make plans with Kacie, I know she's probably already booked out like at least 2 weeks, unless there's like the random like cancellation or like, no, I am open. But yeah, that's one thing like you've been really good at is like, you just don't sit like, oh, like, especially being in like a new place, like, I don't have anything to do this weekend. I don't have any plan. You're like, no, I'm getting this on the books. Like, can you hang out next Saturday? Yeah. Like, can we go hiking in Arkansas or like whatever? Like, you just do the thing. And I like so admire that about you.
But I think it doesn't have to be anything crazy or, planned out either. It can just be spontaneous. Like,
yeah, true.
I'm going to run groceries. Are you doing anything this afternoon? Do you just want to go hang out? Like,
yeah.
I mean, that's community building too. Just inviting people into the daily grind of life.
Yeah.
And doing it together.
Yeah. And like stuff you don't necessarily have to pay for, like, let's go walk at the state park or like whatever, cause I know, especially as singles, like we're living on like a one person income, so it's like, I can't go out and spend a bunch of money, like out to eat every week or whatever. So it is nice to like have those times where it's like, I've literally too, like asked a friend, hey, let's pack our own lunches and let's like go eat at the park. And that was like a fun thing to do, So that's good. What are some other recommendations for next steps that you have?
Yeah. Maybe lastly, just remember that the friendship that we have with the Lord, I mean, that relationship is foundational in our lives.
Yeah.
Everything else is centered around that. And we know that God is good and that he's faithful. And it's great to have, it's needed to have amazing friends and community that you do life with. But if you're looking to them for life, it's always going to come up short. So I think knowing that our relationship with God is most important encourages me to love people well, to the friends that he's given me, and use his love for me as the example. Yeah,
that's really good. I know there's that verse that like he sticks closer than a brother. Like that's who God is for us. He wants to be our friend. He has so much love that he's like wanting to give us if we're willing to receive it. And like you said, his love can transform us to like love better. Kind of like I said with you, like you've made me a better friend. Like that's like the picture with God too, of like when we fully receive his love and his friendship and know that he loves us and wants to be friends with us, then we can all of a sudden start loving people better. And loving them like Christ loves us. And that's the kind of love we all need.
Yeah. And it allows us to be friends out of a place of abundance, not out of a place of lack.
Ugh, Kacie, so many good things.
But we've all been there. So I think that's the love that sustains. Like you said, that's the love that we need. And we're able to be filled up and then sent out.
Yeah.
So.
I love that. Well, now you all know why I invited Kacie, the queen of community, to come on the show and talk about this, because like there are so many good just like one-liners and just even like scriptures that you pulled out that I'm like, okay, I know I've read that, but I never applied it to this context. And so that's really, really, really good. So thank you so much
Thanks for having me.
First of all, being like an amazing friend and showing me how to do community well. I've learned this from you 100%. And thank you for taking the time to come on to the show today.
Aw, love you, friend.
Yeah, love you too. So thank you, ladies, for watching this episode. Go ahead and like just start, even if it's like the first practical step of just praying. If you're like, man, I really have realized that I don't have community, that I'm isolated, or maybe that the community that's around me isn't healthy for me, and so I need to start making some new friends. Just even if you start off today and like every day this week by just like praying for new friendships, and then you'd like to maybe take that next step of like trying out that new church or like reaching out to that person like at work or at the coffee shop or whatever. You don't have to do all of these things at once. Just take that next step. And I really truly believe that even the fact that you're listening to this episode is God's like invitation to you to grow in community and to show you like what life could look like in just a godly biblical community. So thank you so much for tuning in this week, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Beauty of Becoming podcast. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, let me know by leaving a positive rating and a comment of how God used today's episode to speak to you. And don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you listen so you're notified whenever a new episode is posted.